John McMullen, every day at this time at JF McMullen on Twitter. And you can read his national column at FanRag Sports NFL. I want to get into his piece on Zach Ertz because, he writes in the piece, Pete, that Zach Ertz has already arrived. A lot of people have been critical of Zach Ertz, saying, hey, this is a guy that we expect more from. He gives us these flashes. Late in the season, we'll see Zach Ertz burst out. But is he more consistent than we give him credit for, Johnny Mac? Is Zach Ertz better than some Eagles fans are giving him credit for?
Yeah, I think he is. I think he's a lot better, to be honest, than most Eagles fans give him credit for. And I think in a lot of ways it's similar to the offensive line. We've discussed in the past that if you look around the rest of the league and do the comparisons, that's a heck of a lot better than people think it is. You get very myopic with your own team, so to speak. And I think similar case with Zach Ertz. They, expected more, maybe because some of the hype coming in as a high second-round pick out of Stanford, and they feel he hasn't lived up to what they thought he was going to be. But if you do the comparisons and look at the other tight ends around the league, there aren't many guys putting up numbers like Zach Ertz, and that's coming off a year. Remember, I think a lot of people forget he played in those first 3 or 4 games, but he basically missed the entire preseason with an injury, and he was kind of working his way back and still put up those big types of numbers. So, who are you going to compare him to and say that is clearly better as a pass-catching tight end? There's not a lot of names you can go to.
Yeah, when you look at the offense, do you think that he maybe has been underutilized? Would you have liked to see the Eagles feature him more in a way that maybe Kansas City uses with Travis Kelce out there, or the way, I'm not comparing him to Gronk, but he's a big part of the game plan every week?
Yeah, and I think, that's what I'm saying. I mean, if you take a look at the 79 catches and you put into it the fact that, again, he was not, certainly, I say the first 3 games, he was not up to snuff physically. He was still on his way back. And you look at a guy like Travis Kelce, was probably the most productive tight end, and I think he was at 90 last year. You could argue that if Zach was healthy for those first 3 games, he would have been at 90. So I'm not sure how much more you can utilize a tight end than the Eagles have. And by the way, I don't think he's going to be able to put up those numbers because there's better receivers around him. And now you have to sort of distribute the ball more. And those numbers, if anything, are going to come down. So, again, people have to temper their expectations, but realize this is a very good player for what he is. Now, if you're looking for sort of a traditional Y back like Rob Gronkowski, a guy who can block and a guy who can catch and do everything, well, those guys don't exist anymore. That's just not what the NFL is. And the Mark Bavars of the world, those old school tight ends, Gronk's it, basically. So, granted, you can't compare him to him, but that's not fair.
John McMullen's with us here on Ertz. You mentioned that his numbers might not be, as big this year because of the options. Where is he on your offensive weapon depth chart?
Well, it depends how you want to define weapon. If you want to define sort of big strikes, he would be certainly far down the list. Behind Alshon Jeffery and maybe even Torrey Smith. But as far as volume, as the guy who's going to catch a lot of passes, I think the hope would he would be number 2, and he would continue to be the security blanket, sort of the third down chain mover for Carson Wentz. And that's, I think, the role that he should be in and the role he would excel at.
John McMullen with us a minute ago. John, when you were talking about the tight ends, he mentioned Travis Kelce. Well, you have an article on his brother, Jason Kelce, on our website, 973ESPN.com. And I guess Jason Kelce, it's like that Mark Twain quote, reports of my death are greatly exaggerated, right? Eagles fans keep trying to write Jason Kelce off, and he just keeps showing up to work every day.
Yeah, I think a lot of people assumed he would be out of here by now, and I understand why. If you look at the context and the surrounding and the depth, it certainly was shaping up like the Eagles were looking to move Jason Kelce. But the bottom line is he's here, and as long as he's here, he's the team's best center. I think the coaching staff is tremendously comfortable with him. I think the fact that, the Eagles could save $3.8 million in salary cap space if they dealt him. I think that's something the front office looks at and is still interested in. And as I wrote in the piece, roster moves in the NFL are always fluid and anything can happen. And we saw it last year with Sam Bradford. If there's an injury elsewhere in this league and there's desperation for a center, I could see the Eagles still making a move because they have so much depth on the interior. But as long as he's here, he's going to be the starting center.
Yeah, you were right about Alex Mack. That set up a lot of alarm bells when Alex Mack went down, but that doesn't look like that's going to happen. And then his potential replacement is already on the roster, correct? The Eagles are really high on Sayamalu.
Yeah, they are. And that is – an interesting storyline in its own right because, hey, they want him to start at left guard, but, that's not sort of a slam dunk because Alan Barber played very, very well at that position last season. And if you look at how effective he was at that particular position and you sort of that dichotomy I said that existed in the front office really with Howie Roseman looking to move on potentially from Jason Kelce. It exists with that coaching staff again because the coaching staff is probably at least more comfortable with the veteran Alan Barber, but you sort of want to look towards the future. The Eagles would like to see Sayamalu seize that position, but I think that's going to be one of the more interesting battles in training camp.
Hey, do you would you say that Kelce bounced back last year, that had a better year?
I'd say he bounced back in the second half of the season, and he played much better. And that's really been the story for the last two seasons, is he struggled early and sort of righted the ship and started to play better in the second half. I think, as I mentioned, he got a little too sort of caught up in the movement aspect of the game when Chip Kelly was here and everything was based on tempo. He sort of lost a lot of weight, and I think that's where sort of his decline as a player came in the fact that he started to struggle with really big and really strong nose tackles who were just more powerful. And he's always been an undersized guy, even before that. But he's put on about those 10, 15 pounds that he lost. He's back, and I think he's at least closer to being the guy he was before, who could at least battle players like that. That's never going to be the strength of his game. But I think he's getting closer to what he once was.
John McMullen with us. John, how do the Eagles view the backups at that position, Wisniewski and Josh Andrews as well?
Well, I think they understand what they have in Wisniewski, a veteran guy. They know he can step in and play at an acceptable level. I don't think they look at him and say he's an all-star level player who's going to play at that type of level. But if you need to go in that direction, I think they would feel comfortable with it. Josh Andrews is a deeper roster guy, but, he's made it for a long time in this league now, and he's hung on for a reason. But certainly it just talks to the depth because he would be fourth on that list. It would be Kelce, Wisniewski, then Sayamalu, and then Josh Andrews. But that's a lot of guys who can play the center position, and there's not many other NFL teams that could throw 4 players out to play the position.
I want to step away from the line for a minute and just hit on Alshon Jeffery because I don't know if Mike and I have asked you enough about the reunion between him and Mike Groh and the communication that those two guys will have. Can that make, I mean, the guy's already an established NFL receiver, but can that get him back to an elite level, just being reunited with the guy that he had success with before?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about that before. I think with Alshon, it's about health and not much else. Elite players are elite players, and they're going to be good no matter what. And I think if he stays on the field, he's completely healthy, he's going to play at a high level. I think when you talk about coaching and the impact of coaching, it can really matter when you're talking about bubble guys or bottom of the roster guys or guys who are raw or that nature need to be coached up. But a guy like Alshon Jeffery, I mean, a lot of the things he does and does so well, they're not teachable. I mean, to be able to attack the football, high point the football on those 50-50 balls, I mean, there's nothing you can do. There's no drill to teach a guy how to do that. You got to be 6'3". You got to have tremendous hand-eye coordination. You have to just have an innate ability to go up and get the football. He has all that. And that's not a criticism to Mike Groh, but that would still be there if Greg Lewis was the wide receiver coach or anybody else. I think Alshon's his biggest hurdle is going to be staying healthy. If he's healthy, he's a great player.
Yeah, and it seems like, Mike Groh, he had come out and said, hey, this is the best offseason he's had since 2013. Well, he's been nicked up, right? I mean, that's been part of his problems in Chicago, and probably, John, the reason why he's not still a Bear. Yeah,
and it's the reason he didn't get the money he was expecting on the open market, and the reason he settled for a one-year deal. He could have had a multi-year deal in other places, but not at the level that he was expecting before free agency started. And it all correlates to his health and the fact that he has been nicked up so much over the past really 2 seasons. And, but when he has been on the field, he's been very, very effective. And that's through some serious quarterback issues at times in Chicago. Now, Jay Cutler has tremendous arm talent. People can criticize him, but as far as putting up numbers, he could do that. So it wasn't always bad, but there were times when they certainly had issues, and Alshon's always produced when he's been out there.
How much do you think having a guy like Alshon Jeffery, if he's healthy, aids to the development of Carson Wentz? Because wasn't that the goal this offseason, to go out and get him weapons so that he could, develop, I don't want to say faster, but have the ability to, because he could get better himself, but if he doesn't have guys catching the ball or getting open, it surely makes being a quality player a lot more difficult. And I know people say, well, the very best raise the level of the players around them, which is true, but how much is having a guy like Jeffries going to aid Wentz in becoming the player that they hope he becomes?
Oh, tremendously. I mean, that's one thing you always talk about, and that's one thing Zach Ertz brings too, and the fact that he's got such a large catching radius. Jeffrey's the same way. So now you have 2 receivers that kind of can catch the football and are, the best way to describe it is they're still open when they're even not open. In other words, if a cornerback has tremendous coverage on a particular play, you can still throw the ball to Alshon Jeffery. And if he doesn't come down with it, he's going to make sure it's an incomplete pass. And that, inspires tremendous trust in a quarterback. And to have a player like that, which hasn't been here for years and years and years, I mean, it's going to make Carson Wentz better. There's no question about it.
John McMullen's with us. Read his stuff on the Eagles at 97.3 ESPN.com. He has a piece up on Zach Ertz and Jason Kelce right now. Over at FanRag Sports NFL, John, we talked about Friday, John Dorsey and the Chiefs parting ways. You looked into 3 reasons why that may have happened, because a lot of people pretty surprised about that divorce.
Yeah, because, they've done so well, really, since Andy Reid and John Dorsey have been there and teamed up as the coach-GM duo. It's been a very good team. They've made the postseason 3 times, arguably have, if not the deepest roster in the NFL, certainly amongst the top 2 or 3. So it came out of nowhere. And from all accounts, it looks like they just gave Andy Reid the extension as expected, and they were working on an extension with Dorsey, and they originally wanted to announce him at the same time. Something happened between him and the owner there, Clark Hunt. Nobody really understands what. It could be money related. There's a story out of Kansas City today that says it's sort of management style. But I think everyone in Philadelphia, because of Andy Reid's history here, thought it was a power play. And it's just not. It never was. And certainly that's not the reason John Dorsey is out. Because, as I mentioned on the show, Andy Reid had veto power. Now, people, I talk about this all the time when we define general managers around this league. There's different types of general managers, and people sort of don't understand the power structures. And the power structure is that Andy has in Kansas City what he had here, and that's veto power. Now, while I say that, he never got really involved in the personnel aspect because he trusted Dorsey, and he liked Dorsey, and he let him do his job. But my only point to that is there's no need to pull a power play if you already have the power. So it had nothing to do with that, and it's more the relationship that he had with the owner, Clark Hunt.
By the way, John McMullen, you can check him out on Twitter at JF McMullen. I'll throw this one your way. 75-1, the Sixers' 8th best odds. You putting money down?
Not yet. Not yet.
I mean, seriously, though, here's something for you. These are the NBA odds for the finals next year. The Sixers have the 8th best odds in the league. That tells you the biggest – that shows you the whole problem with the league. The 5th best odds. The 5th best odds in the entire league. It's a 50-1 shot to win the championship.
Yeah, I agree. I've always agreed with that aspect of the tank. It's not, sort of a Sixers thing. It's an NBA problem. So I've always agreed with that aspect of it. The fact that you go into a season and really, you could argue there's only 2.
Well, Golden State, John. Golden State has 1-2. They're a heavy favorite. Cleveland's 4-1. Boston is 12-1, and then San Antonio is 20-1. The next team is 50-1.
Yeah, so you can argue, and it's really not even 4 teams that have a chance to win the NBA title, because if Golden State, and you always say, if they stay healthy. We all know that's a caveat. But if Golden State and Cleveland stay healthy, they're probably going to meet in the finals again. And it's a problem. It's a problem for the league. I wish I had a solution, but it is difficult. You don't want teams tanking. Adam Silver talks about it all the time. He hates it. He despises it. But they got to get their heads together. They got to come up with something.
Yeah.
Because it is just a horrible, horrible look for the league. And I know a lot of people don't have a problem with it, but the league has a problem with it. And they don't want this to exist. But they can say that all they want. And most times it does, and that's the problem. Because you don't have a lot of owners that would sign off on what the Sixers did. So in a lot of ways it takes care of itself. But now that the Sixers have been labeled a success, and by the way, that's way too early. I hope all these players hit. But as we've already seen from Jahlil Okafor, Nerlens Noel, there's no guarantees in this league. And there's really, I think, personally, I think it comes down to Ben Simmons, because I think he's the one guy who can be the generational talent. And I know people are going to say Embiid, but I think the way the NBA plays the game today takes Embiid out of the equation. Great player, but this is a league where you got to take 43s a game to win. So I don't think he has a chance to be the generational guy. I think Simmons does. And really, so you're talking about one guy. And if he turns out to be as good as we all hope and we all expect, it's going to be a lot of fun. But I wouldn't, count the touchdown. You might be approaching the red zone, but I wouldn't, people were so thrilled with Jaleel Okafor. You see, it's just not a fit for today's game.
Well, it's 75. The odds are 75-1. Give me $100. I'll put it down for you, and we'll all.
Yeah, well, you're not going to make any money on the Golden State Warriors. So I'll say this: if you want to throw away some money, sure, give the Sixers a shot.
So let's just tell you about the league, though, that the Sixers have better odds than, Toronto, Memphis. Utah was a 4 seed, and the Atlanta Hawks, who have been like the model of consistency for being mediocre, are a 300-1 shot. It's unfortunate.
Well, I think a lot of it, how a lot of it goes. Obviously the Sixers have a ton of hype because the draft just happened, and they're high on a lot of people's lists right now, and everyone's excited. But there are a lot. Obviously, what you're really hoping for this year is, maybe 500, maybe making the playoffs as a 7, 8, maybe a 6 seed, hopefully, and sort of building from there. So there's going to be a lot of teams that are better than them next season, but none of them are going to have a chance to win the NBA title. Yeah, and that's obviously an issue.
All right, check out John's NFL coverage at JF McMullen on Twitter. Thanks, pal.
Hey, thank you, guys.